Hey, what is going on, guys? This is SMEB Reviews, and today it is time to count down the top 10 worst albums from 2018. Let's get right to it. The rules are simple. It must have come out this year, and it has to be a full-length release. No EPs. And also, mixtapes can be eligible, but they have to be looked at a little less critically, as obviously they're a little more slapdash than your typical full-length album. Besides that, let's get to the list. Number 10 may feel a little bit like a cop-out, but it's an ode to albums that are way too incredibly long. Like Culture 2 from Migos, or Scorpion from Drake. Albums that had some decent songs, but were way too incredibly long. If they had been about 10 tracks, none of these albums would have made this list. But when you get into the hour and a half range, you really start to be watered down and encumbered by the length of your project. And that killed a lot of albums this year. I don't know why we got so many. More are David Guetta or Zayn. And no, none of these albums I truly hate. They're just too long. So while it may be an easy way out, number 10 is albums that are way too long. Number 9 goes to a band that I absolutely love. And it's truly heartbreaking for me that this band is on my worst of the year list. But it's Pray for the Wicked by Panic at the Disco. I love Panic at the Disco, and I've loved all their past projects, but this album just was such a letdown. Besides possibly High Hopes and definitely Dying in LA, I don't find anything redeemable here. All the tracks are really lackluster, boring, and borderline obnoxious on occasion. I don't want to hate this album because it is a band that I love. I just want them to... I have a higher standard for them. So, if anything, this album's here out of sheer disappointment, but it really is not good. So many tracks like Roaring Twenties or Dance Is Not a Crime are just annoying and don't serve a purpose. And I just really cannot get into this album. Besides Dying in LA and High Hopes, I will give those two a pass, and a reason why this is only at number 9. But, that being said, I still just did not like this album. Bhad Bhabie shouldn't be famous, but I always try to separate the art from the artist, at least to an extent. I've said before, but context is important. You have to remember who the artist is when discussing the album. But a terrible person and a terrible album can be two very different things. Unfortunately, Bhad Bhabie's a terrible person with a lot of terrible work. Almost everything she's put out is just not good, and I did do a review, but it was kind of more of a joke because I wanted to take it a little easy on her. She is young, she's 15, and I wanted to recognize that. But I said that, and even in my review I mentioned, but Lorde was about the same age when she wrote Pure Heroin, one of the best pop albums, at least of the 2010s. It's an incredible album, so we can see that age doesn't necessarily equal wisdom. But Bhad Bhabie truly is bad behind the mic. She is an obnoxious MC that can't really hold her own. I don't find her intriguing at all, and honestly just very grating to the ears. She sounds way too full of herself, and while that's a common thing in hip-hop and rap, it just does not compliment her well, especially with her younger age, someone without as much experience and her pretentious style to rapping. I do not like this album, and as much as I hate to rag on someone as young as she is, it's still a bad album and something that I can't ignore, especially because it hit mainstream. She's had many hits off this album, including the despicable single Gucci Flip Flops, which is cheesy, dumb, and just truly awful. There's not really anything to praise here. Bhad Bhabie just does a bad job, and I don't feel that there's any more time to be spent on her because I feel like a lot of people agree with me on this. Obviously, she still made it big, so not everyone, but I feel like a lot of people see where I'm coming from and that she's just too immature, and I don't actually think that she's an artist that could never become good and never have any form of skill. I just don't think it's here yet, and I think that she thinks that it's here right now, and I think that's the biggest problem with an album like 15. America by 30 Seconds to Mars is my number 8 pick. And honestly, I feel like most people saw it coming. A couple of these albums on this list are definitely very obvious picks, ones that just about everyone will include on their list, and rightfully so. America is an overblown attempt at being political and trying to fuse rock and more trap elements, and it just does not work. It's not an effective combination in the slightest. Like I said, this is an attempt to be political, but it never really comes across. Often it just kind of seems like these could be simple tracks about love or completely unrelated to politics and really aren't saying anything at all. Now, I did enjoy the lead single, Walk on Water, and I mentioned that in my review, but I still do not like this album, and with every listen, it gets worse because you hear how pretentious Jared Leto is in each of these tracks. There really is nothing here to praise. Walk on Water, like I said, is fairly standard, but it's catchy, I'll give it that. But everything else here just drags. While this album did have a song that made my worst songs of 2018 list, I don't necessarily think that a bad album necessarily has to have one bad song. Sometimes it's just a culmination of so many elements that aren't moving correctly that can really bring down the album. Not every album on this list has a song on my worst songs of 2018 list, and that's on purpose because some of these albums just are bad as a culmination of all of their parts. And this is one of those. I've never been the biggest fan of Owl City. No, they're not the worst, and some songs are truly great, and I can't deny the pop sensibility of Good Time that they had with Carly Rae Jepsen. It deserved to be a hit, and while it's not my favorite song of all time, hey, it is catchy. I do actually really enjoy it to an extent. And I want to like Owl City. I feel like they have some potential there. But this album, Cinematic, is absolutely awful. As I said, Cinematic, the track, was on my worst songs list. And it deserved to be there because it is cheesy and used just about every cheesy poster catchphrase that you could think of in one song with some truly cheesy instrumentation and way too clean pop production. But unfortunately, that continues throughout the album, and while maybe some of these tracks don't necessarily fall victim to each one of those symptoms, it still brings down the album. Almost every song has way too much production that makes it so incredibly clear and glossy, and that really does kill it. And I'm a defender of synthesizers, but they use it so wrong and so incredibly cheesy. It doesn't work, and this is an example of why people don't like synthesizers in music, because it can be used so wrong. Even just reading the track listing, we get some extremely cheesy songs. We have All My Friends, Not All Heroes Wear Capes. Songs like that show why this album will be bad, and even just looking at that album cover, you know you are in for a cheesy and eye-roll inducing listen. All My Friends is about how great Adam Young's friends are, which is wonderful, but man, it can definitely be pulled off better than that. Not All Heroes Wear Capes is about Adam Young's father, and yeah, nothing wrong with saying how great your dad is, but you see where the song's going. It's saying how great his dad is and how he's a hero, although he does not wear a cape and does not necessarily get the recognition that he deserves for it. And yeah, that's a commendable sentiment, and I don't have any problem with that. It's how it's executed, and that is the problem with this album. Unfortunately, this is also an album that's really long, and that does take a toll on it as well. But not as big of a toll as I thought, because the songs do sound different. I'll give them that. They do sound a little different. Unfortunately, they're just really, really cheesy, and I can't get past that. It's something that really does wear on you the more you listen to this album. Cinematic is not good, and it deserves a spot on this list. I said I'd be nicer on mixtapes, but man, does this album deserve to be on this list. Heartbreak Kodak by Kodak Black. It is just awful, and it has nothing to do with the production or how quickly I feel the album was put together. No, it doesn't have anything to do with that. Kodak Black is just it's truly bad behind the mic. And I don't understand how he's been famous. Yes, tons of people and tons of music's out there that probably sounds worse than this, but it's not hitting mainstream. This is a mainstream album, a mainstream artist who is truly terrible behind the mic. Almost every song is so incredibly grating on the ears because Kodak Black is just bad. He's better when he raps, but unfortunately he does sing quite a bit. And some of these songs are just so silly. And I don't mind a goofy rap song, but he never really takes on that goofy persona in the songs. He never comes across as though he's trying to be goofy. And yes, Kodak Black actually did have a full-length project that came out this year. But it just didn't sound as bad as this. And again, it had nothing to do with the production. This album, or this mixtape rather, is much worse than the album was. And it just shows Kodak as a truly terrible singer. Honestly, there's not much more to say because I feel like his singing brings this project down enough, but the songwriting is not there either. Most of the instrumentation is truly boring and bland, but I'll give that to production and the more slapdash nature of a mixtape, so I'll pass it. But the songwriting is bad. All the lyrics are cheesy and dumb, and we get some truly uncomfortable lines in quite a few songs, some of which I will not repeat in the attempts to make this review, this list, a little more clean. But it is a bad mixtape, and the only mixtape that does make this list. This will definitely be my most controversial pick. Sweetener by Ariana Grande. So, before you go and try to tell me I'm wrong for thinking this, hear me out. Ariana Grande is a powerful singer, one that I actually enjoy a lot. I really enjoyed her past projects, and while maybe not every single song is a gem, some of the hits are definitely deserving, and some of the best pop hits we've seen in years. I have a ton of respect for Ariana Grande, so it's even more disappointing when we got Sweetener, an album that I feel really falls flat. An example of why this album falls so flat is really paralleled with God is a Woman, one of the singles from this album. Just as Ariana Grande is a great artist who can do great things but fell flat on Sweetener, God is a Woman sounds like a track title that could do so many awesome things, that could really make some interesting statements about religion. And I was super excited to hear it. And then we got the track, and it was just a song about sex and God being a woman because the sex is so good. And that is just truly disappointing. I feel like that song could have been so amazing, and I was so disappointed. And that just parallels with this album. Every song on it is actually bad, and I don't have many songs on here that I do like. No Tears Left to Cry is an acceptable song, and there's a few others. I actually did like Sweetener okay. But most of these songs are so incredibly grating with awful production and really annoying beats. A lot of the electronic beats in this song are just annoying. And I have talked about The Light Is Coming featuring Nicki Minaj, which has the most annoying sample of some guy yelling in the background, as well as a really, really annoying synthesizer line. While I want to like this album, it just cannot happen. And like I said, I know that this is a more controversial pick, and a lot of people do like this album. But it's not one that I can defend in any regards. I like Ariana Grande, but I can't defend this album. So many of the tracks are so incredibly repetitive and boring and stagnant. And I just don't find anything here that really screams potential and power and emotion. It's an album that really fell flat, especially when we've seen Ariana Grande getting more and more political as she's aged. One that she could have done a lot with, but didn't. But don't get it twisted. This album's not just on here because I feel like this was a wasted potential sort of album. It is bad. Most of the tracks are obnoxious, repetitive, and uninteresting. All of them. And it only gets worse every time I listen to it. This was an album I actually thought would be in the bottom half of the list, but quickly rose to number 3. It is absolutely deserving to be here. I hate to say that, but it really is. Another easy target, just like 30 Seconds to Mars, America. Number 3 is our album from Five Finger Death Punch and Justice for None. And Justice for None is an album that is so misguided. Ivan Moody, the lead singer of Five Finger Death Punch, is not good. I don't think that there's been anything good pumped out from this band. And honestly, this album is just epitomizes it. Champagne and Fake are two of the worst tracks on this album, where Ivan Moody just complains about the haters and how he hates how people are fake and just wants people to be honest and real with him. But he comes across so childish, and that's just a problem with this whole album. And while he has a more gruff vocal style, as he's doing a more hard rock approach to music, it just doesn't seem intimidating. And he's trying to be, but it doesn't come across that way. It's laughable. Almost throughout this whole album, it's hard not to laugh, because every song is him trying to be so tough and edgy, but it just doesn't happen. It's laughable, and he becomes a joke in this album. I don't understand exactly why this is an artist that has become mainstream, because there's just no real appeal to it. There's much more harsh and headbanging music that you could get into. But yet Five Finger Death Punch is simply laughable. And it's hard not to laugh at a band like this and an album like Injustice for None. Top 2! Okay, number 2 is Question Mark by XXXTentacion. And everyone knows that XXX is not a great artist, and while he has built a very loyal fan base, I cannot ever get behind him. He definitely is an awful person, and he is an artist who brings in his bad nature into his music. He incorporates it and capitalizes on it. And that is a problem. We have some of the most disgusting songs of the year on this album. Songs like Changes and Sad are manipulative and just pathetic. It's disgusting. Sad definitely is awful, and I do talk about it in my worst songs, so go check out that video. But this whole album is just not good. We start off with XXX telling everyone that this is just a stroke of genius. How he is a genius, and he hopes that we can understand his alternative way of making music. And there's nothing really innovative here. I mean, there's nothing too different. I don't think anyone's credited him with coming up with some new style, and I will not either. There's nothing here that is genius. And whenever you get an album starting with the artist saying how genius he is, you know you are in for a bumpy ride. And we unfortunately are on Question Mark. So many of these songs are just simply misguided, and we even get a track which is just a reggaeton track where he doesn't do anything. I Don't Even Speak Spanish, LOL is the track title, and it shows that he didn't really care enough to try. He just outsourced that problem to capitalize on a trend that was very popular in modern music. This is definitely a hip-hop rap album that is uninteresting at best, but one, when taken in context of the artist, as well as some of these individual tracks, like Changes, and definitely Sad, even Moonlight, just show that this is a truly awful album, with nothing redeemable about it. And it's still worse than Skins, an album where all Skins was just demos and samples of recordings that the record label had that they just shoved out just so that they could capitalize on X's death. So, this album is terrible, and I absolutely hate it. From the very beginning of the year, I knew that nothing could take the number 1 spot except for this album. An album that is awful. An album that can beat one where we have a song that is manipulating an ex by threatening suicide. One that is truly terrible on all levels of music and just should not exist, and from a very popular artist, one of the most popular artists of our decade. It's Man of the Woods by Justin Timberlake. Firstly, this album's unfocused. We get some songs that are very country pop sound, and while it's not a very good sound that he cannot pull off at all, it is at least a focus. But then we get songs like, let's say, Sauce or Filthy, which are not country at all and don't really tie in that genre in the slightest. We get a more funkier song with Sauce, and then a more synthesized electronic sound with Filthy. Filthy's a completely undistinguishable song for a single genre. It starts off as an arena rock song that turns into a very droning synthesizer song that's absolutely awful. But yes, it's completely unfocused. Songs that don't at all fit in with the country and woodsy kind of attitude that he's wanting to build with this album are here. Why does this album open with Filthy? A song that absolutely is practically completely compiled of synthesized elements rather than more natural sounds like a guitar. It's completely mind-blowing, just that alone. And almost every example of that country pop sound in this album just does not work. Songs like Supplies is extremely obnoxious with a completely repetitive sound where Justin Timberlake just croons the same line over and over with some more a cappella kind of rhythm section, and it's extremely obnoxious. Breeze on the Pond. Almost all of these tracks, Man of the Woods, all of these are truly awful country pop songs. But there is one example of how it can be done right, and that is Say Something with Chris Stapleton. Honestly, I think Chris Stapleton saves it, but I'll give Justin Timberlake some credit on this song. It's actually pretty good, and I do really enjoy it. It shows that country pop sound that could actually work a lot better. And I do wish that this album had gone in that direction, and while there is one actually really good song that even could have been considered for the best list, it was at least in my top 100, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's saying something at least. It's a good song. I actually do really like it. But that being said, this album's over an hour long. So those 3-ish minutes are such a small portion of this album. So it doesn't really balance it out at all. Yes, there's one good track, but honestly, that one good track just shows us that there could have been a good album here, and there just wasn't, so it makes it even worse. Every single element of this album is terrible. Even some of the track titles, like Flannel. I don't even want to get into Flannel, because we all know what it's going to be about. And it's just cheesy and dumb. And this whole album is awful. I didn't think that I'd hate it quite as much as I did going in, but whenever I started listening to this album for the very first time, I knew that this album deserved my #1 spot on my worst albums of 2018. Thank you guys so incredibly much for watching this video. What did you think? Were any of these albums that you actually enjoyed, or do you agree with me on most of my picks? Let me know down below. I do have my worst songs of 2018 list out currently, and the best songs and albums of 2018 will be out soon. So look forward to that. Please subscribe if you're new to the channel, because I do love making these videos, and I do have a pretty constant stream of videos coming out. Plus, you don't want to miss those best lists, so go check it out. Thank you guys so incredibly much for watching this video. It really does mean a lot to me. I do have a Twitter if you want to go check that out. Link will be down in the description. Besides that, I'll see you guys later.